You are nothing but an unpaid maid in this house. Pack your worthless things and get out of my sight right now. The voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy air of the hallway like shards of broken glass. It belonged to my mother-in-law, a woman I had spent nearly 3 decades serving with absolute devotion. But before I could even process the venom in her words, a violent shove slammed into my back. The world tilted instantly. Gravity took hold and my body was thrown into empty space, tumbling helplessly down the steep wooden staircase. A series of heavy, sickening thuds echoed through the empty house as my body collided with each sharp edge of the steps before finally crashing onto the cold hardwood floor below. Pain exploded behind my eyes, a searing white-hot agony radiating from my left arm and across my skull. I lay there gasping for air, the metallic taste of shock filling my mouth. When I finally managed to open my blurred eyes, I looked up. Standing at the top of the stairs, peering down at me with cold, detached amusement, were 3 people: my mother-in-law, her daughter, and Kazuhiko, my husband of 27 years. Not a single one of them moved. Not a single hand was extended to help me. Under normal circumstances, a woman would cry out in terror, scream in righteous anger, or immediately pull out her phone to dial the police and report a domestic assault. Yet in that defining moment, an eerie, absolute stillness settled over my mind. The burning tears vanished, replaced by an icy, crystal-clear realization. I quietly pushed myself up from the floor, ignored the throbbing agony in my body, and calmly brushed the dust off my clothes. At that exact second, the 3 people laughing at the top of the stairs had absolutely no idea that this single act of cruelty was the exact trigger that had just completely and irrevocably destroyed their comfortable lives forever. My name is Kumiko Nakamura. I am 52 years old, and this year marked my 27-year milestone in a marriage that had slowly, systematically drained the life out of my soul. By profession, I am a licensed, highly experienced nurse, working exhausting overnight shifts at the city's major general hospital while running myself into the ground to financially support this household. When I first married Kazuhiko, nearly 3 decades ago, I believed I had finally found a sanctuary. I grew up as an orphan, raised entirely within the sterile walls of a state institution with no family to call my own. Because of that lonely childhood, I harbored a deep, almost desperate longing for a warm, conventional home. I swore an oath to myself that I would treat my mother-in-law with the same love and respect as a biological mother, and I treated my sister-in-law like a beloved younger sister. But over 27 long years, a brutal reality became undeniable to them. I was never a family member. I was merely a highly convenient live-in housekeeper who demanded no wages. I was a limitless wallet to pay off their debts and a free, qualified 24-hour on-call medical caretaker. That evening, the violent argument began over something entirely trivial. I had spent hours preparing a nutritionally balanced, low-sodium dinner specifically tailored to my mother-in-law's severe chronic hypertension, strictly following the medical guidelines prescribed by her primary physician. Yet the moment she tasted it, she threw the bowl across the kitchen, screaming that it was tasteless trash meant to insult her. I didn't utter a single word of complaint. I simply knelt down and wiped the floor. But as I turned to walk up the stairs to my room later that night, her built-up rage erupted and she pushed me down. From above, my sister-in-law scoffed, "Stop overacting, Kumiko. You fell on purpose just to make us look bad." Kazuhiko simply sighed, turning his back. "You brought this on yourself by provoking my mother." As I sat in the dark hallway, feeling the warm trickle of blood from my forehead, the final thread of my patience snapped. The illusion of family evaporated completely. Looking up at their mocking, arrogant faces, I felt no sadness, no anger, only an absolute, unshakable clarity. I looked at them and whispered a single phrase, "I understand." They smiled, believing I had submitted yet again. They had no idea that those 2 words were the formal announcement of their impending ruin. The following morning, the sun rose over the neighborhood, just as it always did, casting an ordinary warmth through the kitchen windows. I woke up at my usual hour of 5 o'clock, ignoring the severe throbbing in my skull and the deep purple bruising that had begun to stiffen my left arm. With methodical precision, I prepared a full traditional breakfast, brewed fresh coffee, washed the mountains of laundry, and ironed Kazuhiko's work shirts until they were completely flawless. When my mother-in-law walked into the dining room leaning heavily on her cane, her face wore a look of smug, absolute victory. She looked at my bandaged forehead and let out a sharp, mocking chuckle. "Well, it looks like a little tumble down the stairs finally taught you some manners," she sneered, pouring herself a glass of water. "It's about time you learned your place and stopped acting so high and mighty." Kazuhiko didn't even bother to look up from his morning newspaper, casually sipping the coffee I had prepared while grunting in muttered agreement. They truly believed that because I was an orphan with no external family and nowhere else to go, I would simply swallow this horrific abuse, just as I had swallowed every minor insult for the past 27 years. They believed that a display of physical violence would solidify my submission forever. Their profound arrogance was their ultimate blind spot, and it became the very foundation upon which I built my escape. I looked directly into my mother-in-law's eyes, offered a gentle, serene smile, and softly replied, "Yes, Mother." My voice was completely calm, devoid of any trembling or resentment. To them, my absolute silence looked like total defeat, but in reality, it was the heavy, suffocating silence that immediately precedes a catastrophic storm. The moment they left the house, Kazuhiko heading to his corporate office and his mother and sister going out for a lavish shopping trip. Using my credit card, I took off my apron and walked out the front door. I did not walk toward the local grocery store. Instead, I boarded a bus and headed straight to a prominent real estate firm located right in front of the central station. The agent greeted me politely, asking how he could assist me today. Without a single word, I reached into my bag and placed a thick, leather-bound folder on his desk. Inside were the official unencumbered deed and title ownership documents to our family home. "I want to place this property on the market immediately for an expedited cash sale," I stated, my voice completely firm. The real estate agent looked at the documents, then looked back at me, his eyes widening in complete shock. The property sat on a prime piece of land that had originally belonged to Kazuhiko's late father. However, what the family had completely forgotten or willfully chosen to ignore was a critical financial event that occurred 7 years prior. Kazuhiko had engaged in a disastrous, fraudulent business venture that collapsed entirely, leaving him facing personal bankruptcy and massive corporate debt. To prevent the banks from seizing the land, he had desperately begged me to use my spotless credit and substantial savings as a specialized nurse to refinance the entire property under my sole exclusive name. Over the next 7 years, every single monthly mortgage payment, every property tax, and every structural maintenance fee had been paid entirely out of my independent bank account. Legally, mathematically, and absolutely, the house belonged entirely to me. I sat there calmly filling out the paperwork, signing the exclusive listing agreement, and handing over a duplicate set of keys to the agency. There was no sadness in my heart, no hesitation, and no regret. The heavy, suffocating chains of emotional attachment that had bound me to that toxic family for nearly 3 decades had been violently severed the moment my body struck the staircase floor the previous night. What remained within me was a state of pure, calculating logic and absolute execution. Leaving the real estate firm, I walked briskly toward my next destinations, the central bank, the ward administration office, and the international courier terminal. Inside my handbag, a document that had remained hidden in the darkest corner of my closet for decades seemed to hum with new life. My passport, and right beside it were several official documents written entirely in English, covered in the dust of a dream I had abandoned long ago. I was about to reclaim my life, and no one in that house had any power to stop me. By noon on the second day of my disappearance, the absolute reality of my absence began to violently disrupt the luxurious, lazy lives of the Nakamura family. Kazuhiko woke up on a Saturday morning, stretching comfortably in his bed, expecting the rich, savory aroma of freshly brewed dashi miso soup and grilled fish to be drifting up from the kitchen. Instead, The house was completely dead silent. There was no sound of a vacuum cleaner, no clinking of dishes, and no movement whatsoever. He let out a loud, irritated click of his tongue, throwing his blankets aside as he marched down the stairs. "Kumiko, where is breakfast? Do you know what time it is?" He shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. But there was no response. The kitchen was completely empty, immaculate and scrubbed clean, but entirely devoid of food. The refrigerator contained nothing but raw ingredients and a few containers of frozen meals. His sister descended the stairs a few minutes later, yawning loudly while scrolling through her phone. "Where is my white silk blouse? I told Kumiko to iron it by this morning. I have a lunch date with my friends," she whined, slamming a cupboard door shut. Soon after, their mother appeared, hobbling into the living room, banging her cane against the floor. "What is the meaning of this? Why hasn't my morning tea been brought to my room? That ungrateful woman is throwing a pathetic tantrum just because of a minor disagreement last night." Kazuhiko walked over to the dining table, intending to find a note of apology. Instead, his eyes fell upon a single crisp sheet of paper resting exactly in the center of the table. It was a formal document with a distinct green border issued by the municipal ward office, an official divorce petition. My section was already filled out in perfect, elegant calligraphy, complete with my legal signature and official Hanko stamp. Even the mandatory sections for 2 legal witnesses had been completely filled out and verified. Kazuhiko let out a loud, arrogant laugh, tossing the paper back onto the table as if it were a piece of worthless junk. A divorce. Who does she think she is trying to threaten? She has no family, no savings, and absolutely nowhere to go. She's probably hiding out at some cheap business hotel, crying her eyes out. Just ignore her. By Sunday evening, she'll be on her knees at our front door, begging for my forgiveness. His mother and sister laughed in total agreement, entirely convinced that this was nothing more than a childish act of defiance. They spent the rest of the day ordering expensive takeout and leaving the dirty containers all over the living room table, confidently waiting for the maid to return and clean up their mess. But Sunday night arrived, and the front door never opened. Kazuhiko's irritation turned into a slight, underlying sense of unease. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number, only to be met with a cold, automated operator stating that the line had been permanently disconnected. He opened his messaging apps, but his text messages remained completely unread. "Go check her room," he commanded his sister. She grumbled, walking up to the small back bedroom I'd been forced to occupy for years. A few minutes later, she walked back down, her expression deeply confused. "It's weird. All her everyday clothes, her heavy winter coats, and even her makeup are still in the closet. Her large suitcase is still sitting in the corner of the room. She literally left with nothing but her small handbag." Hearing this, Kazuhiko let out a massive sigh of relief, his arrogance returning in full force. "See, I told you. She left all her belongings behind. That means she has absolutely no intention of a long-term separation. She'll be back before the work week starts." But Kazuhiko's observation was entirely superficial. His eyes were completely blind to the fact that while my physical clothes remained the absolute core of my identity, had vanished. He had failed to check the small hidden wall safe in the back of the closet. The safe was completely empty. My national nursing license certificate, my specialized medical qualification registry documents, my financial records, and my valid international passport were completely gone. I had left behind the cheap, heavy garments of a housewife because I was preparing to step into an entirely new existence. And the comfortable, arrogant world they took for granted was about to experience its very first catastrophic collapse. On Monday morning, the true nightmare began to claw its way into Kazuhiko's reality. He arrived at his corporate office, his mind weighed down by the chaotic state of his house, which had fallen into complete disarray over the weekend. The kitchen sink was overflowing with moldy dishes, the trash was rotting in the heat, and the laundry had piled into a mountain. He had spent the morning listening to his mother scream about her missing medication and his sister throw tantrums about her unwashed clothes. Just as he sat down at his desk, attempting to focus on his corporate reports, his phone vibrated violently. It was a notification from his home security app, followed immediately by a frantic phone call from his sister. Kazuhiko, you need to come home right now. There are two men in business suits standing at our front gate, and they just unlocked the main entrance using a set of official keys. They claim they are from a luxury real estate agency. Kazuhiko's blood ran completely cold. He abandoned his work, ran out of the office building, and took a frantic taxi back to the suburbs. When he arrived, he found two elegant professional real estate agents standing in his driveway holding thick clipboard files. "What the hell do you think you're doing on my private property?" Kazuhiko roared, his face twisting in rage. The senior agent looked at him with an expression of calm professional detachment. "Are you Mr. Kazuhiko Nakamura? We are here under formal contract with the sole legal owner of this property, Mrs. Kumiko Nakamura. The property has been listed for an expedited cash sale, and a highly lucrative purchase agreement has already been finalized with a corporate developer. We are here to conduct the final structural appraisal before the mandatory vacancy period begins." Kazuhiko felt as though the ground beneath his feet had suddenly turned into liquid. This is a lie. This land belonged to my father. My wife is a thief who is suffering from a mental breakdown. He shoved the agents out of the driveway, slamming the front door in their faces. As he stood in the dark, uncooled hallway, trembling with a mixture of terror and unbridled fury, he noticed a thick official envelope sitting in the mail slot. It bore the prestigious gold emblem of one of the most powerful, aggressive corporate law firms in Tokyo. With trembling fingers, he tore the envelope open, pulling out a multi-page legal document written in cold, unyielding statutory language. It was a formal letter of representation and immediate demand, signed by a senior attorney representing me. The document stated that all future communication must go through my legal counsel under strict threat of harassment litigation. It outlined 3 devastating legal actions. First, an immediate presentation of the finalized divorce decree based on extreme marital cruelty and physical assault supported by irrefutable evidence. Second, a formal demand for the immediate liquidation and equal division of all marital assets, including the immediate sale of the primary residence. Third, an explicit, terrifying demand for the retroactive reimbursement of over 23 million yen in personal financial loans that I had advanced to cover his failed business debts over the past decade. Kazuhiko dropped the papers onto the floor, his face completely drained of color. His hands shook so violently he could barely breathe. He had willfully erased the memory of his financial ruin from his mind, choosing to believe he was the wealthy patriarch of the house. He had completely forgotten that his entire lifestyle, his home and his social standing were built entirely upon a foundation of my silent financial sacrifice. And now that foundation had not simply walked away, it was actively demanding the immediate return of everything it had ever given. Instead of recognizing the absolute peril of his legal situation, Kazuhiko's deep-seated arrogance drove him to make a fatal, catastrophic mistake. He stood in the middle of his messy living room, surrounded by his weeping mother and screaming sister, his face darkening with a vicious, vengeful expression. "That pathetic orphan thinks she can use a fancy law firm to scare me," he hissed, slamming his fist onto the table. "She is nothing but a public hospital nurse. She doesn't have the financial stamina to fight a prolonged legal battle. This entire lawsuit is nothing but a massive bluff to force me into a corner. I will show her what happens when you try to cross the head of this family." Kazuhiko believed that the fastest way to force me into complete submission was to completely cut off my access to survival capital. He opened his laptop, logged directly into our primary joint marital bank account, intending to immediately withdraw every single yen of our combined life savings, leaving me completely penniless in the middle of the city. He pulled up the balance screen, a cruel smile on his face. But the moment the web page loaded, the smile froze instantly on his lips. The account balance displayed a shocking, miserable figure, 3,000 yen. Kazuhiko rubbed his eyes in disbelief, clicking the refresh button repeatedly, but the number remained unchanged. He furiously opened the transaction history. For the past 5 years, Kazuhiko had assumed that my substantial monthly salary as a senior specialized nurse was being automatically deposited into this joint account, which he used freely to fund his golf club memberships, expensive dinners, and sports betting. He had failed to realize that the moment he had forced me to sign over my inheritance to cover his business debts years ago, I had quietly and legally established a completely separate private bank account at a different financial institution. My salary had been redirected there for half a decade. The joint account had only contained the bare minimum funds required to pay the basic household utilities. Furthermore, he discovered that a secondary credit card he carried, which was issued under my primary account name, had been formally reported as frozen and deactivated due to an immediate separation status. He was completely cut off from my wealth. Rage-blind and irrational consumed his mind. He dialed the phone number of an old college acquaintance, a highly corrupt, disreputable financial consultant who specialized in navigating the legal gray zones of corporate fraud and asset concealment. After explaining the situation in a frantic, disjointed stream of words, the consultant let out a low, sinister chuckle through the speakerphone. "Kazuhiko, my friend, you are handling this entirely wrong. You don't need to fight her in a civil court. You need to turn her into a criminal. Go to the central bank and the local police station immediately. File a formal affidavit claiming that your elderly mother is suffering from advanced, severe cognitive decline and that your wife has spent the last several years systematically abusing her position as a nurse to forge her signature and embezzle tens of millions of yen from her private retirement funds. File an official emergency missing persons report under the category of endangered and mentally unstable flight risk. Claim she stole a massive amount of cash from your family's safe before fleeing. Once the police issue a national search bulletin, her bank accounts will be automatically frozen by federal anti-fraud protocols. Her passport will be flagged at every transit terminal, and she will be arrested the moment she steps into a public space. Kazuhiko's face twisted into a grotesque, triumphant grin. "Brilliant," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. "I will turn that arrogant woman into a hunted federal fugitive. She will be dragged back to this house in handcuffs, begging for my mercy on her knees." Within 2 hours, Kazuhiko had compiled a massive folder of forged financial ledgers, falsified medical statements regarding his mother's mental state, and typed out a devastating, completely fictional narrative of corporate embezzlement and domestic theft, delivering it directly to the Financial Fraud Division of the Municipal Police Department, completely unaware that he had just personally pulled the trigger on his own total destruction. The next morning, Tuesday, Kazuhiko walked into the grand marble lobby of the city's major general hospital, his chest puffed out with an attitude of absolute, unshakable victory. This was the prestigious medical institution where I had worked for 27 consecutive years. He intended to locate my superiors, present, the official police report he had filed, and ensure that my professional nursing license was permanently revoked for gross moral turpitude and criminal flight. He wanted to destroy my career, my reputation, and my financial livelihood in a single, devastating blow. He marched up to the main administrative desk, slamming his hand down onto the counter. "I demand to speak with the director of nursing immediately," he shouted, ignoring the shocked looks of the patients sitting in the waiting area. "My wife, Kumiko Nakamura, is a senior nurse here. She is a criminal who has stolen millions of yen from my family and is currently fleeing from the police. You are harboring a fugitive." Within minutes, the heavy double doors of the administrative wing opened, and a stern, immaculate woman in her late 50s stepped out. It was the chief hospital director, accompanied by 2 imposing uniformed security guards. In her hand, she held a single official document stamped with a deep red federal seal. Kazuhiko sneered at her, pulling out his copy of the missing person report. "Are you the director? You need to terminate Kumiko Nakamura immediately. She is an orphan with zero moral compass, and I am here to collect her remaining pension and corporate severance pay on behalf of my family." The hospital director looked at Kazuhiko with a gaze of such freezing, absolute contempt that it felt like a physical blow. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she stepped forward and held up the document in her hand, pressing it directly against the glass barrier of the counter. Mr. Nakamura, this is an official medical forensic examination certificate and statutory assault declaration compiled, signed and authorized by our hospital's chief trauma surgeon and the forensic pathology unit. Kazuhiko blinked, his voice suddenly faltering. What is that? The director's voice was like cracking ice. Last Thursday night, Kumiko Nakamura was admitted to our emergency department, suffering from a severe closed head injury, a deep laceration to her frontal bone requiring 14 stitches, and a complete spiral fracture of her left ulna. These severe internal injuries are entirely consistent with being violently thrown down a flight of wooden stairs. Before she was sedated for emergency surgery, she provided a full legally binding statement detailing the physical assault perpetrated by your mother while you and your sister stood by and willfully blocked her access to emergency medical services. Kazuhiko's jaw dropped, his mind spinning into complete panic. No. That's a lie. She fell down the stairs because she was clumsy. She's making it up to get money. The director continued as if he hadn't spoken. As a premier medical institution, we have a zero-tolerance policy for domestic terrorism and violence against our staff. This forensic file, along with 27 years of impeccable employment records, was hand-delivered to the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's Criminal Investigation Division yesterday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. The fraudulent missing person report and the absurd financial embezzlement allegations you filed yesterday afternoon have already been flagged by federal prosecutors as an explicit attempt at malicious perjury and witness intimidation. The police are not looking for Kumiko. They are currently looking for you. Kazuhiko fled from the hospital building like a hunted animal, his heart hammering against his ribs in a state of sheer, unadulterated terror. He didn't take a taxi. He ran through the narrow alleyways, his expensive business suit covered in sweat and dirt, his mind completely collapsing under the weight of the realization that his entire life was imploding. When he finally arrived at the gate of his suburban home, panting for breath, he was met with a scene of total apocalyptic chaos. A massive commercial moving truck was parked squarely in the middle of his manicured front lawn. 4 burly uniformed moving laborers were methodically carrying out the expensive furniture, the television sets, the leather sofas, and the designer clothing boxes, loading them into the back of the truck. His sister was standing on the sidewalk screaming hysterically, trying to bite the arm of a moving supervisor who easily pushed her away. "What are you doing?" "Stop touching my things, Kazuhiko. Do something. These criminals are robbing us in broad daylight," she shrieked, her makeup completely smeared by tears. Kazuhiko charged forward, his face purple with rage. "Stop this immediately! This is my house! I'm calling the police!" A tall, imposing man in a pristine charcoal suit stepped out from the main entryway of the house holding a gold-plated pen and a stack of notarized legal documents. It was the chief enforcement officer from the real estate development firm. "Mr. Kazuhiko Nakamura," the man stated with absolute authority. "At exactly 10 o'clock this morning, the expedited cash sale of this property was legally finalized. The full purchase price of 85 million yen was transferred into the verified sole account of the legal owner, Mrs. Kumiko Nakamura. Under the explicit emergency terms of the contract, the property has been slated for immediate commercial demolition to clear the way for an apartment complex. You have exactly 30 minutes to clear your persons from this land. Any items remaining after that time will be legally classified as abandoned commercial refuse and destroyed." Kazuhiko grabbed the man's lapels, his voice cracking into a desperate scream. "You can't do this!" "My mother is inside. She is sick. She can't move." The enforcement officer coldly unlocked Kazuhiko's grip, his expression unyielding. "Your mother has already been removed from the premises by a private non-emergency medical transport team, which was paid for by Mrs. Nakamura as a final act of charity. She has been delivered directly to the emergency triage ward of the state hospital due to a severe hypertensive crisis caused by the complete withholding of her prescription medication. The real estate firm has also filed an official notification with Adult Protective Services against you and your sister for criminal medical neglect. If you step back inside that door, you will be immediately arrested for aggravated criminal trespass. Kazuhiko fell backward onto the grass, staring at the house he had lived in his entire life. The grand wooden front door, the very door where he had stood just days ago laughing as his wife lay bleeding on the floor, was now completely sealed with bright red official federal foreclosure tape. In less than 48 hours, his home, his social status, his wealth, and his comfort had been completely wiped off the face of the earth, leaving him standing in the dirt with absolutely nothing but the clothes on his back. The remnants of the Nakamura family spent the next 24 hours descending into the deepest, darkest corners of social and physical degradation. Without a single yen to their name, and completely banned from entering their former home, Kazuhiko and his sister were forced to spend the night huddled underneath the plastic tarp of a public park bench, shivering violently as a cold torrential rain soaked them to the bone. The absolute dependency they had harbored toward me for nearly 3 decades had left them completely, fundamentally incompetent. They didn't know how to look up emergency shelter locations, they didn't know how to apply for state welfare, and they didn't even know how to purchase a basic convenience store meal without a credit card. On Wednesday morning, a heavy, freezing fog rolled into the city. Kazuhiko sat on the wet park bench, his teeth chattering, his hands raw and blistered from the cold. His sister lay curled up in a ball on the grass, weeping continuously, her expensive designer shoes completely ruined by mud. Suddenly, Kazuhiko's phone, which had only 5% battery life remaining, rang with a piercing, high-pitched tone. He pulled it out with numb fingers. The screen displayed the name of his corporate employer, the Senior Executive Vice President of Human Resources. He answered it, his voice shaking with a desperate, pathetic hope. "Hello, sir. Please, you have to help me. My house was stolen. I am in a crisis." The Vice President's voice was completely devoid of humanity. "Mr. Nakamura, do not speak another word. This phone call is being recorded for corporate legal archiving. Yesterday afternoon, 2 plainclothes detectives from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department executed a formal search warrant at your corporate desk. They uncovered extensive evidence that you have been utilizing corporate expense accounts to fund your private gambling debts, along with the formal criminal affidavits filed against you for perjury, false police reporting, and felony domestic assault. Your actions have caused an unprecedented, catastrophic public relations crisis for this corporation. By unanimous decision of the Board of Directors, you are hereby terminated from your employment immediately under the clause of gross professional misconduct and moral turpitude. Your corporate pension is completely forfeited. Your health insurance is terminated as of this second, and the company is currently preparing a multi-million yen civil lawsuit against you for corporate defamation. Do not return to the building. Your personal items have already been thrown into the external industrial waste bin." The line went completely dead. Kazuhiko stared at the black screen of his dead phone as it ran out of power completely. The final pillar of his existence had collapsed. He was no longer a wealthy corporate executive. He was an unemployed, homeless, debt-ridden criminal suspect. His sister crawled over to him, grabbing his wet trousers, her voice cracking into a desperate shriek. "What did they say? Are they sending money? Kazuhiko, I'm starving. Do something, you're the man of the house." Kazuhiko looked down at her, a hollow, empty sensation expanding inside his chest. He suddenly realized that the very words she was screaming at him were the exact words he had hurled at me for 27 years. He had demanded that I handle everything that I solve, every crisis that I bear, every burden, while he sat back and enjoyed the fruits of my suffering. And now the universe had flipped the script completely. He was trapped in the very prison of desperation he had constructed for me, and there was absolutely no escape. With nowhere else to turn, driven by a mixture of starving desperation and a delusional manic belief that he could still somehow force me to save him, Kazuhiko gathered the last remnants of his physical strength. He dragged his sister across the city, walking for 4 brutal hours until they arrived back at the general hospital. He intended to locate the chief hospital director, discover my hidden location, throw himself at my feet, and use a pathetic, calculated display of tears and manipulation to convince me to withdraw the criminal charges and give him a portion of the 85 million yen from the house sale. He believed that because I was a soft-hearted orphan who had tolerated his cruelty for 27 years, my natural maternal instincts and guilt would force me to take him back. They pushed past the hospital reception security, running straight toward the private administrative office of the director of nursing. When he violently threw the door open, he did not find me. Instead, sitting behind the large mahogany desk waiting for him with a look of absolute icy calm was my senior corporate defense attorney, flanked by two high-ranking detectives from the Tokyo Police Fraud Division. Kazuhiko fell onto his knees, fluid running from his nose, his voice cracking into a pathetic howl. "Where is Kumiko? Please tell her I am sorry. Tell her my mother is dying in the triage ward. Tell her we have no home. She can't do this to her own family. She is a good, traditional woman. She wouldn't leave us to starve." The attorney let out a cold, mocking sigh, slowly opening a thick official folder containing international legal documents. "Mr. Nakamura, your pathetic performance is entirely useless. You are standing here talking about tradition and family, yet you have spent 27 years completely blind to the true nature of the woman you shared a bed with. You truly believed you married a helpless, uneducated orphan who had no choice but to serve you. Let me reveal the absolute truth of who Kumiko Nakamura actually is." The attorney pulled out a series of vintage, pristine documents stamped with the official gold crest of the federal government of Canada and the International Red Cross. 27 years ago, before she ever met you, Kumiko was not a simple low-wage clinic nurse. She was a globally recognized, highly decorated graduate of the elite international medical residency program in Vancouver. She holds a prestigious lifetime Canadian permanent residency visa under the category of exceptional human capital. She is a fully certified high-tier advanced practice registered nurse specializing in critical trauma care and geriatric hospital administration, a highly elite qualification that allows her to command an independent salary 4 times larger than your highest corporate executive compensation. Kazuhiko's voice completely vanished. He stared at the documents, his brain entirely unable to process the words. No, that's impossible. She was just an orphan. She didn't have anyone." The attorney stepped forward, his eyes burning with a righteous anger. "She grew up in an orphanage, yes, but she possessed an intellect and a work ethic that you could not even fathom in your wildest dreams. She had a brilliant, internationally prestigious career waiting for her in North America. But 27 years ago, she fell in love with you. She believed your lies about creating a warm, loving, traditional family. For 27 years, out of pure, unadulterated love and devotion, she willfully chose to hide her brilliant qualifications. She chose to work exhausting overnight shifts at a local hospital using her elite skills to quietly keep your sick mother alive and pay off your pathetic gambling debts, completely content to live a simple, silent life as long as she was loved. But you didn't love her. You treated her like dirt. You treated her like an unpaid slave. And last Thursday, your mother threw her down the stairs. At that exact second, the loving wife died completely. The brilliant, elite, international, medical professional woke up. She didn't just leave you, Mr. Nakamura. She has completely deleted you from her universe. The attorney closed the folder with a sharp, definitive slam that echoed through the quiet office like a thunderclap. He looked down at the broken, mud-covered man sobbing on the floor and delivered the final, devastating blow. You came to this airport terminal yesterday morning believing you were going to catch her, correct? You spent your last remaining resources bribing a corrupt consultant to find her flight details. But you are far too stupid to realize that we knew exactly what you would do. The reservation for the 9 o'clock flight to Vancouver was nothing but a deliberate, legal dummy trail designed to draw your pathetic attention away from reality. While you were standing in the terminal screaming and making a fool of yourself in front of the airport security, Kumiko was already 10,000 meters in the air, Flying aboard a private medical transport aircraft over the Pacific Ocean, she landed in Canada yesterday afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock. Kazuhiko let out a low, animalistic groan of absolute irreversible despair, slamming his forehead against the cold office floor over and over again until his skin bruised. The realization of his total, absolute stupidity was more painful than any physical injury. He had possessed a brilliant, wealthy, incredibly beautiful and devoted queen of a wife, a woman who would have gladly protected him and cared for his family until the day they died. Yet because of his pathetic, fragile, masculine ego and his mother's toxic arrogance, they had tortured her, beaten her, and treated her like garbage, completely unaware that she was the only thing preventing them from falling into absolute ruin. And now she was gone forever, completely outside the reach of Japanese law, protected by an international border and a new life. The two police detectives stepped forward, placing heavy steel handcuffs around Kazuhiko's wrists, dragging him out of the office along with his weeping sister. He offered no resistance. His spirit was completely, entirely dead. Today, if you visit the darkest, poorest district of the city, you might see a broken, middle-aged man with graying hair and hollow, lifeless eyes, working 12 hours a day, doing hard manual labor just to pay off the interest on his millions of yen in debt. He lives in a tiny, freezing room with no heating, spending his nights changing the diapers of his completely paralyzed, screaming mother, while his sister sits in the corner, losing her mind to madness. They have no friends, no money, no home, and absolutely no future. They are trapped in a living hell of their own design, entirely consumed by the memory of the woman they threw away. And half a world away, in a beautiful snow-covered valley in British Columbia, Canada, a brand new, ultra-luxurious geriatric medical center has just opened its doors. Standing in the center of the brilliant sunlit lobby, surrounded by wealth, respect, and a community that absolutely adores her, is a beautiful, elegant woman in a pristine executive uniform. Her name is Kumiko Nakamura. She looks out the grand glass windows at the majestic clear blue sky, a serene, truly happy smile resting on her face. She is finally free. She is finally home. Thank you so much for listening to this profound story of justice, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of human dignity. If this narrative touched your heart and reminded you that true value can never be suppressed by cruelty, please show your support by hitting the like button, leaving your deep thoughts in the comments section below, and subscribing to our channel for more incredible cinematic stories of life's hidden truths. May your path always be filled with light, respect, and true happiness.